Haven Arrest Missionary Baptist Church Sunday School Lesson number 6, Sunday, January 7, 2018. The lesson is entitled A Sincere Faith. The lesson comes from Daniel chapter 1, verses 8 through 21. We were asked to read Daniel chapter 1, verses 1 through 21. The place is Babylon. The time is 587 BC. The book of Daniel portrays the life of Daniel, but the main character of the narrative is Daniel's God. We witness God as the one planning and executing world events. He is never taken by surprise or caught unaware of the slightest circumstance. Daniel trusted God in every situation. Like Joseph, his confidence was grounded in Jehovah, regardless of the events surrounding him. Daniel spent at least 70 years away from his homeland in Judah. He served under various foreign leaders, including Nebuchadnezzar, Melzar, Cyrus, and Darius. During his life, he was a faithful servant of earthly kings as well as his God. Our lesson this week centers on Daniel when he was taken captive and relocated in Babylon, while all in likelihood still a teenager. Today's aim: facts. To understand the culture and politics of Daniel's time and recognize the influence that culture had on young Daniel. Principle: to appreciate the resolve of a young man caught up in a world of idolatry and mysticism. Application: to confirm that God is in control regardless of our feelings or circumstance, and to encourage believers to stand up for their faith, trusting God for the outcome. Illustrating the lesson: Daniel's special diet led to his improved continence. The issue, however, was not really the diet. It was the dedication and faithfulness of Daniel that the Lord rewarded. Practical points. 1. When you commit to obey God, expect that commitment to be tested. Daniel 1:8. 2. Stand for God and watch Him intervene on your behalf. Verses 9 through 10. 3. When possible, believers cooperate in a hostile world, but we cannot compromise the truth of God's word. Verses 11 through 14. 4. God calls us to obey Him and shine for Him in the world. Verses 15 through 16. 5. God uses our skills and knowledge for His glory as we yield our hearts to Him. Verse 17. 6. The wisdom of God is superior to the practices of the world. Verses 18 through 20. 7. God has placed you where you are for a reason, so trust in Him. Verse 21. Golden text. But Daniel proposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat. Daniel 1:8. Today we have 3 lesson outlines. 1. Convictions tested. Daniel 1:8 through 10. 2. Convictions maintained. Daniel 1:11 through 17. 3. Convictions rewarded. Daniel 1:18 through 21. Introduction. The northern kingdom of Israel was conquered and taken into captivity by Assyria in the year 722 BC. We never read about any specific return of the people from that captivity to their own land. The southern kingdom of Judah, however, went into captivity in 3 separate deportations and eventually came back in 3 separate returns. The 3 deportations, each of them under King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, are summarized in 2 Chronicles 36. The first occurred in the year 605 BC, verse 7. Daniel was taken to Babylon at this time. The second occurred in the year 597 BC, and among the people taken was Ezekiel, verse 10. The third deportation occurred in 586 BC, when the city of Jerusalem was razed, with homes, palaces, walls, and the temple destroyed. Verse 17. The book of Daniel opens with Daniel and his three friends in Babylon. They were given Babylonian names, verse 7, about which they were not concerned. They did have another important issue to face, however. Convictions tested. Daniel 1:8. But Daniel proposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Verse 9. Now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. Verse 10. And the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who have appointed your meat and your drink. For why should he see your faces worse liking than the children which are of your sort? Then shall ye make me endangered my head to the king. Personal resolve. Daniel 1:8. One of the emphasis in this book is the sovereignty of God over individuals and nations. Kenneth Gangel summarizes, Daniel wastes no time getting to his theme, the sovereignty of God. The captivity of 605 BC was not a victory for Nebuchadnezzar any more than the crucifixion was a victory for Satan. The God of creation decided that year that a new chapter would open in his personal world book. So he sent Jehoiakim to defeat and Daniel to Babylon. Throughout this book, we are reminded of the truth expressed in Isaiah. Behold, the nations are as a drop of a bucket, and are counted as the small dust of the balance. Behold, he taketh up the isles as a very little thing. All nations before him are as nothing, and they are counted to him less than nothing and vanity. 40:15 and 17. Daniel was in Babylon because of God's orchestration of the situation, but that did not mean he was free of responsibility to serve his God righteously and faithfully. Daniel showed no concern over the secular education or being given a Babylonian name, for he knew who he was and how God saw him. The prescribed diet, however, posed a problem, for this invaded his spiritual convictions. Israel was told to never worship false gods, Exodus 34:15, warned against being drawn into pagan worship by making a treaty with the inhabitants of the land. The danger was that when the pagans sacrificed to their gods, they would invite Israelites to share in eating the sacrifice and thereby join in the false worship. It is probably that Daniel's objection to the Babylonian food and drink was that it had been dedicated to false gods. To eat and drink this would be a violation of the personal convictions he drew from God's law. He requested, therefore, to be excused from that prescribed diet. Personal integrity. Daniel 1:9 through 10. In these verses, we see not only Daniel's integrity, but also that of the chief of the eunuchs or officers over Daniel and his friends. Ashpenaz had observed that Daniel was not naturally a troublemaker, so as he developed kind feelings toward him. Even this was the sovereign working of God in his heart. God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs, verse 9. His rejection of Daniel's request, therefore, was not based on personal negative feelings toward him. Ashpenaz revealed in his response to Daniel a loyalty to his boss, the king. No doubt there was a certain amount of fear involved, but he did not express any bad feelings toward Nebuchadnezzar. After all, when you serve the king of the land, you cannot make some decisions on your own, especially if they would go contrary to what the king had ordered. Ashpenaz had responsibility to carry out. So although he felt kindly toward Daniel, he did not dare change the king's rules. Ashpenaz's argument was solid. He feared Nebuchadnezzar, and he knew that if he took matters into his own hands, there would be serious consequences, and the king had specifically ordered the diet in question. The king had ordered that the best food and wine be given the young men because he thought this would best prepare them for serving him. He gave no thought to the fact that it had been dedicated to his pagan gods, for that was just part of his religious culture. Ashpenaz argued that if Daniel and his friends did not eat the king's food, and as a result did not look healthy, he would be held responsible. This could result in his death. Therefore, Daniel's request was bad for all of them. Convictions maintained. Verse 11. Then Daniel said to Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Verse 12. Prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. Verse 13. Then let our continence be looked upon before thee, and the continence of the children that eat of the portion of the king's meat, and as thou seest, deal with thy servants. Verse 14. So he consented to them in this matter, and proved them 10 days. Verse 15. And at the end of 10 days, their countenance appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. Verse 16. Thus Melzar took away the portion of their meat and the wine that they should drink, and gave them pulse. Verse 17. As for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Special request, Daniel 1:11 through 13. Some of us have learned that when those in authority over us order us to do something we find objectionable, we should try to come up with creative alternative plan that will allow us to act in good conscience while also satisfying the demands of those over us. Of course, we should do this only when our personal standards or convictions would be violated if we did what we were told to do. Otherwise, we should simply submit. Daniel could not submit because he knew his actions would violate his spiritual convictions. So he devised a creative alternative and presented it to Melzar, the steward, who had been appointed over him by Ashpenaz. Daniel proposed a 10-day test in which he and his friends would be put on a vegetable and water diet. The word translated pulse in Daniel 1:12 refers to things that are sown, so it is possible that grains were included in Daniel's proposal. It was the meat and wine apparently sacrificed to pagan gods that presented the real problem. In the law, there is no mention of unclean vegetables. It is, if given only vegetables, then Daniel and his friends could eat anything set before them without objection. This would not only resolve the issue with eating the meat, but would also mean kosher food was always being offered to them. Daniel left it up to the steward to make the final decision after the test diet was completed. He proposed that the steward could examine them carefully to see how healthy they looked. If they were not up to par, the steward could determine the next action. Daniel was confident in his protective God, but we can also assume that if necessary, we would have taken a stand against the royal diet and suffered the consequences. This entire experiment probably was approved by Ashpenaz, since he was the one who had appointed the steward to this position. Special results, Daniel 1:14 through 15. This time Daniel's request was granted, perhaps because the steward saw a way out of his potential dilemma. A time frame had been established, so he could always resort to conditions prior to that if he needed to. There was still plenty of time to get the young men in shape if the experiment failed. For the next 10 days, Daniel and his friends were served what Daniel had requested, after which they stood before the steward to hear his decision about the matter. The result was that Daniel and his friends appeared healthier than all the others who were given the diet ordered by the king, Daniel 1:15. The word continence includes more than what we usually think, because the men were examined for their general appearance, not just facial features. The word fairer indicates that they looked very good, with no evidence of malnutrition or loss of muscular strength. The text also says they looked fatter, which was a positive rather than a negative trait. They looked firm and well built. Although there is no specific mention about God intervening in this test, we can clearly see his controlling hand. 10 days is a relatively short time for what sounds like significant results. God honored these young men for their willingness to take a stand on what they knew was right. How strong would we be in the face of a similar situation? Special treatment, Daniel 1:16-17. As soon as the steward saw the results in the young men, he permanently withheld the king's diet and continued giving them the vegetables and water they had requested. It is obvious to us that God oversaw the entire process and allowed these men special treatment not afforded anybody else. We do have to wonder whether these four were the only young captives willing to take such a stand. There is no indication anywhere in Daniel's writing that others were willing to follow this standard. The change of diet was just the beginning, though. God did much more for them since they had boldly taken a stand for him. All four of them were given an unusually high degree of knowledge, along with unusual skill in learning. Evidently, as they were being taught Babylonian literature, astrology, and science, they were very quick to catch on. They would have been the ones an instructor chose to help others slower in the learning process. They were at the head of every class. Perhaps even more important, God gave them wisdom. Wisdom involves a unique ability to see life and its events as God sees them. The four men were not limited to observational understanding, but could see deeper into the movements of society and human nature. Since Nebuchadnezzar was preparing them for responsible positions in his administration, this was a very important gift for each of them. Daniel was given one additional gift, the ability to understand visions and dreams. This sets the stage for much of what comes later in the book. He had an ability that led him to stand before kings and proclaim major movements in history and among nations. Convictions rewarded. Verse 18. Now at the end of the days that the king had said he should bring them in, then the prince of the eunuchs brought them before Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 19. And the king communed with them, and among them all was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king. Verse 20. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. Verse 21. And Daniel continued even unto the first year of King Cyrus, facing Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel 1:18-19. Have you ever stopped to realize how intelligent Nebuchadnezzar must have been? Only someone of great brilliance could personally interview young men like this and recognize them to be far superior in intelligence and understanding than all the others he interviewed. He apparently probed their thinking deeply and in every area he could think of. This happened when the days of training he had ordered came to a conclusion. It was the chief of the eunuchs himself, probably still Ashpenaz, who took them to Nebuchadnezzar. He had been the one in charge of the entire program, even though he had a steward working under his authority with this particular men. There may have been other stewards over other groups too, but in the final analysis, he was the one accountable to the king and so was responsible for presenting them to him. If he was at all nervous about these men, he soon saw that that was unnecessary. The results were conclusive. Among all those in training, none was found to compare with Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. They therefore were the ones who entered the king's service. It will become clear in the rest of this book that their secular education did not damage their spiritual standards. This reminds us that it was said of Daniel that he had resolved in his heart not to defile himself with anything outside God's will. Impressing Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel 1:20-21. No matter what subject Nebuchadnezzar explored with the young men, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. Rather than taking this phrase literally, we need to understand that it is an idiom referring to superior intelligence and understanding. While the men were naturally intelligent, we see clearly from the text that God enhanced that intelligence with extra measures of understanding. The mention of magicians and astrologers in Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom is a reference to 2 categories of wise men and counselors he employed. As Daniel later related, they were not always wise and were sometimes very inadequate counselors. In a secular government, we cannot expect individuals to have godly wisdom and understanding about life. Daniel and his friends began immediately in the service of Nebuchadnezzar. There is much more focus on Daniel than on the others, though they do not disappear from the pages of Daniel entirely. Chapter 3. Daniel was just now beginning a long time of royal service. In fact, as the last verse of our text indicates, he continued even beyond the fall of the Babylonian Empire. Here is a man like Joseph who lived a godly life and, as a result, was used in the lives of many other people, including world rulers. The faith of these men was not at all pretentious, but rather real and sincere. They had a confidence in God that enabled them to stand for him in the face of all tests. Questions. 1. Why were Daniel and his friends concerned about the king's diet but not their Babylonian education or names? 2. Whose integrity is displayed in Daniel 1:9-10? 3. Why did Ashpenaz say he could not grant Daniel's request? 4. How did Daniel offer a creative alternative in his request? 5. Why did the steward agree to this offer, and how did this test turn out? 6. After the diet was changed, what were the results for the 4 men? 7. How did the gift of wisdom set these men apart from others? 8. Who interviewed these men, and what did he discover about them? 9. What idiom describes their superior intelligence? 10. What does the obedience of the men reveal about their faith? This concludes the Sunday School lesson for Sunday, January 7, 2018. Thank you for listening. God bless.